Christopher, how are you doing this evening?
Doing very well, Ron. How are you tonight?
I'm doing quite well as well. I'm excited for tonight's show. I was excited last week, but our guest,
Hey, Pepper.
Lady
Good
Ann,
to see you.
yep, she had the flu.
Things happen, unfortunately,
So
but we are back and live this week. So very, very excited because, of course, this week we have our very first, and so the first for us is a little bit of a different format for us tonight. But yeah, we are very excited for tonight's show.
that's right, our very
Now, by
first
the way,
studio guest.
our very first guest, and of course, over the course of the last year, we have had several shows on the topic of vampires. We did a really great show on the topic of witches, and tonight our guest is someone who straddles both of those worlds. She refers to herself as a vampire witch and identifies both as a vampire, and we'll get to that as well as the sort of a flavor of witchcraft, whether it's Wicca or some other form of. And of course, we're going to welcome insight and questions for our guest, and explore a little bit of the life and story of Lady Ann Selene. So without further ado, let's bring Lady Ann on, and we'll get a chance to find out who exactly she is and what she's all about.
Absolutely.
Well, hi,
Hello,
Ann. How are
Lady Ann.
you?
Hello, I'm well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, you're feeling better from that flu that you had last week, correct?
Yes, I am. It was one thing after another, it seemed, and my kids were unwell, and now it's passed on to my neighbors, and so I'm so grateful to be over it, but 'tis the season.
Tis the season, but I'm a little concerned because, if Hollywood taught me anything, that is that vampires are immune to these kind of mortal kind of infections. So what's up with that?
Oh, unfortunately, I didn't get that lucky.
Oh my goodness. You have a very impressive resume. So, Christopher, if
Oh.
it's okay, I'm going to take a few seconds here and just read this out so our listeners can understand a little bit more
By
of who
all
Lady
means.
Ann is. Is that okay? All right. So, Lady Ann was born with the paranormal in her blood. That might be the reason you have the flu as well, too. You should get that looked at. She has had experiences beginning from her earliest childhood memories, from ghost shadow entities and Sasquatch encounters, and more. Boy, you got a lot to cover here, my dear. Lady Ann is a Reiki master, an intuitive tarot reader who loves to dive into the spiritual realm and adds and adds an otherworldly flavor to the show. Let's see what else we got here. And is also the owner of KPNL Radio, which is a digital broadcasting station that airs music 7 days a week and paranormal podcast after 5 p.m. Lady Ann's book is now available, Aperture in the Veil, Born in a Preternatural World. It explores what it is like to grow up with psychic abilities and seeing things you thought only existed in your nightmares. She has also been a guest on many other shows, including Coast to Coast AM. My dear friends and listeners, this is Lady Ann, and I'm glad that you're here, my dear.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you so much.
So, at what point in your life did you wake up and say, I'm identifying as a vampire?
Oh my
How did that
gosh.
come
Well,
to be? How did Lady Ann Vampire come to fruition?
oh gosh. Well, it's one of those things where you kind of you identify as it, but you don't really realize that that's what the title that you really want to take on.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until about 2 years ago when I found out that, hey, there are a lot of other people that are out of the coffin, so to speak, and they do identify as this. Um, it was back in 2005, actually, that I spoke to somebody who told me that a vampire culture even existed. And they told me that there were people that actually had fangs, and there were clubs and gatherings, and I was so in awe because I felt like, oh wow, okay, so there's other people out there that are like me. But it was interesting because we talked for quite some time, and then all of a sudden he just he disappeared back in the shadows, so to speak, and I never heard from him again, and I never found anybody else after that that was into any of this stuff until after I got into doing my podcast, The Caravan. And from there, entering into this entire world of the paranormal, I found other people that it's like, no, I identify as a vampire. And everything just kind of fell into place.
That's awesome. Now, are you the blood-sucking type of sanguine vampire that I kind of have a fantasy that you are? But no, I'm thinking that you're not, are you?
No, I am not a sanguine vampire.
Okay.
It's
Careful,
more
Ron. We're gonna have
so.
to get HR on you for that one.
Oh goodness. So you hear about people that are like, I guess they would be called energy vampires, and when you hear that word, it's more like, oh, the people that come into the room and they just cause that negativity, and it just kind of sucks all energy out of the room. That is something that is completely different from somebody that's more of a psychic vampire that interacts with like the life force, the chi. Think of Reiki and how you will, with Reiki, you kind of pull the energy down and you're working with that energy and you're giving these healings to people. Well, you can work with it in reverse as well, where you're actually taking in that extra energy that is kind of dissipating off of, because all of us are kind of like a boiling pot of water where we're full of energy, but the steam that rises is the excess energy that none of us really, that we don't need. So then there are people like myself that can go through and we can take in that extra energy, and with that extra energy I can use it to do my intuitive tarot readings, because all of that stuff, whether you're doing a healing, whether you're doing a reading, it does cost you energy, and it does, I can feel exhausted after one.
Very cool.
That actually makes a great deal of sense to me. I do a lot of public speaking, and
Mhm.
I've joked frequently that when I'm doing a tour or any kind of a public event, that it's very much like being a vampire, because the response of the people completely determines how I function. If
Yeah.
people are engaged, if people are responding, then it enlivens me, it enervates me, and I'm really on, I'm really sharp, and I feed on the energy that the crowd is giving off. If they're
Mhm.
non-responsive, if they don't feel engaged, then I become completely depleted. So it actually makes a great deal of sense to me, both psychologically and psychically, that you'd be able to sort of take in that excess energy and use it to sort of foster creativity and foster your own power, and also top off batteries.
Mhm. That's right.
Right.
So that's a good point. So there are people out there that can take too much, though, correct? I mean, there could be a negative side to this as well, correct?
Yes, there can be. I mean, it takes all kinds. There's good people and there's bad people. So
Mm.
obviously there's going to be positive and negative within every community. So there are those that, I mean, you can take too much energy or you can go too deep, because there's the surface, which is kind of the excess energy that you're giving off, but you can energetically connect to somebody's chakras, to to their very center, to their very soul. And you definitely want to kind of know what you're doing. You definitely want to practice consent. You want to be able to have a connection with that person. You don't want to just, go around and be trying to deep feed off of, anybody.
Deep feed. See that's new to my
Even if
vocabulary.
the people who are in the sort of even the sanguine vampire community talk about that. They talk about the fact that there's always the issues of consent. There's people who are ethical, who are less ethical about it, and about the idea that ethically speaking, there's no issue whatsoever if you are being safe, if you're being, smart, and if you obviously
Mm,
train and hone your abilities so that you're not pushing somebody past a point that they're willing to go. So I would imagine that there's some
right.
similarity.
Yeah,
Exactly.
from the chat room, Pepper Jackie asked, and this is a great question. How do we know whom to trust to do this kind of energy work with?
That's tough. I mean, even with me, I started doing energy healing when I was 15. And I just turned 36 on November 21st. So I've been doing this for a while, and you really just have to practice discernment. I mean, I'm going to be careful always who I share my energy with and who I share my time with. And it kind of goes into like with KPNL. Everyone that I have on the station, I know them personally, and I know that the things that they're doing is genuinely from their heart. They're heart-centered people, and I believe in the work that they do. I believe in the messages that they are sending out, and so of course I'm going to have them on my station. And it goes that way with everything in my life. So my friends, my partners, you really have to practice discernment. And if they're a genuinely good person and you really feel like you can trust them, go with that. But if there's red flags and you're unsure, you really need to learn how to trust yourself and work with your own intuition. I mean, I think.
So in dealing with feeding off of somebody, what would be a red flag?
Oh gosh.
I
You
guess
mean
somebody
if
somebody that's in it for all the wrong reasons. I'm sure there's people like that as well too, right?
Oh yeah. No, I mean there's people that will go into it and they are just kind of there to it's really hard because I don't go places. I haven't been to any events. I haven't been to any really in-person gatherings. I've really been a solitary person so far in regards to all of this. I've done a lot of kind of book work and stuff, and then personal work with my friends, but to go to any events, I haven't done that yet.
Now, I think when Pepper Jackie asked the question, I don't know if, kind of which direction she meant it to be in. I know obviously people would want to have trust with you, but also have you ever worked with somebody in a sort of an energy taking experience where it ended up leaving I guess, a bad taste in your mouth, where you sort of drew at somebody, but actually found that it felt toxic or wrong and ended up being depleted because of it?
No, I have not yet. I mean, I am still very new to the community. I've only had my fangs for about 2 years, and like I said, I really haven't gone in person with anybody. I've just had conversations, and there again, I'm very protective of who I communicate with. My friend group is small, and it's kind of hard to even be able to have a conversation with me personally. So I I really haven't had any negative experiences yet.
Now, you say you've had your fangs for 2 years, and I know because I watched a couple of interviews with you before this to sort of prep a little bit. I know that you are referring, in some ways at least, to getting the fangs that you are wearing, which I think you got them from a fellow named Father Sebastian. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
But when you say I've only had my fangs for 2 years, there's also kind of feels like there's almost a sort of a subtext there, meaning that you've also sort of almost as if you were turned or sort of acknowledged your vampirism 2 years ago. Do you ever use that sort of metaphorically as well as literally?
So when I ended up getting my fangs, it was right before that. It was making the decision that, okay, I do want these fangs, and the fangs do represent that I am embodying this as my identity. So, yeah, it was 2 years ago that I decided, okay, this is me, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what this represents. So I wouldn't say necessarily turned, I would say finally embodied my true self.
It's like a rite of
Now,
passage,
these fangs
right? I mean,
are,
Yes.
and the fangs are removable, or are these permanent?
They're like what is it called? Dental caps.
Okay.
So so they're removable.
do you ever wear them to the
Which allows you to
dentist?
have a day job if you.
Yeah.
Right. No, actually, it's funny because I was a dental assistant for quite some time, and I was learning how to make, the different things, and I had talked to him. I was like, "Hey, I would really love to make fangs," and he, of course, looked at me like I had two heads, and So I never really brought it up with them other than that one time. I never wore them there. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Chris, I'm kind of wanting fangs now.
They're
I've
fun to
had,
have.
I've had some fantastic fangs made over the years. Many, many years ago, when I was a teenager, I went to see a live production from a local theater company of Dracula and was very
Oh
shocked
wow.
at the actors on stage because they actually had prosthetic fangs. And in a local theater production, that seemed extraordinary. And I looked in the little
Mhm.
playbill for it, and there was a name of a dentist. So I actually approached him and had him make a set of fangs for me. This was back in the 1980s, so a million years ago. And
How?
and then made a double set by a fellow named Nash. It's DNASH. You've heard of him because I think he's fairly active in the vampire community. He did a beautiful set for me, but unfortunately, both sets of those fangs are long, long gone. But I had great fun with them over the
Aw.
years. So Ron, go ahead, get yourself a set of fangs. I got to
I'm going
tell you,
to.
it's empowering.
I'm,
It really
I'm gonna
is.
get myself a set. Although, see, I think I relate more to werewolves. Do they have like a werewolf club out there? Can I do that?
You and me both,
Uh,
the hairy boy.
I mean,
Yeah,
there are
that's right.
communities
That's
for
right.
everything.
Yeah, but what?
There's
There's
a pretty
something.
wide community of. I'm sorry, go on, Ron.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You were talking about the why community. This is all going to come together. So, what were you saying?
There's a pretty wide community that often use the term theory and animal shifters.
Yeah.
Identify with different sort of animal forms and traditional shape shifting. And so, you know what? I think it's a really interesting subject because there is so much talk these days about identity politics, people identifying in different ways. And it's a subject that, depending on who you're talking to, people respond to it with mockery, people respond to it with confusion or with disapproval. But I think it's extraordinary. It's really extraordinary because these archetypes are very powerful. They're very powerful. There's a reason they've been in our sort of consciousness for millennia. And so I think especially in the 20th century, when so many of these, I mean, the topic of our show, Monday Night Monsters, we discuss monsters in sort of folklore and how they relate to, reality and real. And in the 20th century, so many traditional have sort of flipped the script and become heroic or positive archetypes. And I think tapping into that is a one deal of power behind. I'm 100% for it with Ron.
We lost you a little bit there, but yeah, I think what you were saying does make perfect sense. And we talk about the Twilight movies. As much as people had trouble with these sparkling vampires, there was a bit of a change in the cultural outlook on what it means to be the other, right? I mean, even though these are creatures that have to consume life forces in order to live, they still had this sense of um, possible salvation to them, which we've never seen before, right? They can interact with humans, and
Right.
there's a sense that they can also be very good. They're no longer monstrous. And I think that's what's going on now when we talk about archetypes, and Christopher said it so brilliantly. We're talking about something that's been out there since we began as human beings. And this is just a cultural input that we are defining at this point in our our development. But no, I think that I would like to, although I think I would identify as a werewolf, there's just something about the vampire community that's so gosh darn central. You know what I mean? It's not like you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about,
Right.
Christopher. It's much more
I think so.
hands on, I guess I should say. Yeah. Speaking of hands on or not hands on, because you don't have to use your hands for anything, right, Lady Ann? This is all psychically done, correct? No hands, right?
Yes. Right.
Okay, so I
Right.
do have
No
another
hands.
question from Pepper Jackie, who I'm starting to become a little concerned about because she's asking some pretty pertinent questions here. So I'm thinking she might have a vampire problem. But she says, "What is the added?" Oh, no, I'm sorry, no. How does one protect themselves from energy vampires? So that's a great question. So, say you're walking down the street and
Mhm.
somebody wants to prey upon you. How do you go
Right.
about protecting yourself?
Honestly, gosh, this goes back into healing group, and one of the very first things that I ever learned are how would you phrase that? Our energetic health is just as important as all of the other health, what we eat and making sure we get enough sleep and all of this kind of thing. You definitely want to. One thing that I learned was that I would surround myself with this white healing energy and this blue flame of protection. And you just really visualize yourself kind of being in a, whether it's a pyramid or if it's a bubble, and these are protective energies that go around you. And it really protects you, it protects your energy. You can project it out as far out as you want it, 50 feet or 100 or just right around you. And it all comes down to intention and your visualizations. Do that before you go to sleep at night, every morning when you get up. That way, as you're going to work, you're protected. While you're there at work, you're protected. You're protected whether you're at the grocery store. You're protected while you're sleeping. I think that it's something that's important to do in general, not just against, psychic vampires or what have you, but just overall.
Yeah, very well stated. Very well stated. Another question from Pepper Jackie. What is the attitudes from society, both positive and negative, towards your choice of vampirism?
Um, Gosh, it's that's an interesting one. Yeah, because okay, so I live in this paranormal community. We were actually just talking about that. It's one of those things where this has been my life. It's more normal for me to be talking to people about, oh, well, I just saw the shadow entity or the Sasquatch experience that I had, or what have you. Um, so kind of when you're out in the world and all of a sudden you mention one of these things and they look at you like you've got two heads, it's kind of that reminder that, hey, not everybody lives in the same world that you do. So I've had people that they've laughed and they've been like, are you serious, or I've had people that became fearful and thought a lot of misconceptions in regards to it. A lot of people will think of vampire and they put the word parasite with it, which I don't think, I mean, it meant a lot what you said, Christopher, about being able to understand, like when you're up there and you're speaking and that energy exchange between the audience. I mean, it was perfectly said. And a lot of people, they can't think that way. So, it's been negative, but because I do live in the world that I live in, it's also to me, it's been pretty accepted and pretty understood.
Right, but you and Christopher also said something earlier, which I think is very interesting as well, because for the first time in vampire tradition, we are talking about consent, because originally this was an act of violence against somebody, right? This wasn't
Mhm.
something where two parties were agreeing upon an interchange. So I think that has changed as well, too, to the point that you're coming to say that I need something from you and you're asking to have it freely given. Now, I would assume also, that being said, that if something is freely given, it's also going to be much more beneficial to the person taking it. Is that a true assumption?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it would be a pure energy exchange at that point because, I mean, if you're sitting there with somebody and they're kind of reluctant or they don't want that, I mean, you shouldn't proceed at all. But
Mm,
if you're sitting there with someone and they're like, yes, no, I would love to participate, I would love to help you with that, it's going to be a lot more fluid, it's going to feel a lot different. Yeah.
mhm. Right. So have you had any interactions at all with sanguine vampires? Because whenever I
Getting
was writing my book on vampires, I started to look at a lot of these kind of communities, these peripheral communities. And at any given time, if you want to have your blood drank by somebody, there's an internet site to find that, and vice versa as well too. And I just wondered about how that works within that community. But you have no working knowledge of that, do you, Lady Ann?
I have never met anyone at all. I've never had a conversation. I've never heard from anybody that's actually a sanguine.
Mm.
Is it so I'm totally blind to that entire community.
So let's ask Chris. Chris, so whenever you had your teeth, did you ever meet anybody from the sanguine community? I want to say yes from that.
I would say the answer is in the beginning. In the beginning, no. I mean, in the early days, I'm an old man, and back in the there wasn't much of a paranormal and this kind of goth community just beginning to sort of come into existence. But the idea of sort of vampirism as a lifestyle wasn't really a thing yet. But by the 90s, it had and so yes, eventually I meeting some people, and I have to say the folks that I met were not all together folk. I think maybe not necessarily the most responsible practitioners, so new, and there wasn't a whole lot of community to sort of set guidelines.
Oh, you're back, Chris. You actually froze up a little bit there. Can you hear us? You there? You back with us, Chris? I think that he might have frozen Lady Ann.
I think so.
Oh, no.
The way that it
yes. But he was talking about, he and I are almost the same age. I think that we're right around the same age. And I can imagine back in the 90s with like The Cure and Morrissey playing in this little room lit by one lava lamp. I could understand there's probably not a lot of guidelines going on there.
Right. Well, I mean, when I was...
Chris?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we're getting a little bit of lag here. Okay. I apologize, folks. I'm still having some trouble here. But no, just getting some lag. And so I don't know. Did someone just ask a question? Because I'm afraid I missed it.
No, we were just talking about your time in the 90s.
All I was saying is that I did not end up significantly interacting with these people back in that time. Wasn't really my cup of tea. Since that time, I haven't really been a part of any active vampire sort of events or community, except in the folkloric and mythic sense, because those are sort of the angles that I pursue. But I do on that front, I do want to ask you, Anne. So how long in your life have you been interested in vampires? Did you grow up loving vampire folklore, loving the movies and things like that? I mean, certainly that seems like that would be a good entryway to sort of get into this life.
Yes, I did. I remember, I can't remember exactly how old I was, but I remember watching Interview with a Vampire. I mean, there was all of the other, because I grew up on the old black and white monster movies with my dad, and I grew up with my grandparents. And so, of course, there was Dracula and all of that, but then I saw Interview with a Vampire. And I don't know, for me, there was just such magic in it, and the way that they told the story, and the way that Louis described that night that the world was the same, but it was different. And I don't know, it was almost like it kind of, I guess you could say, awakened something. And then from there, I definitely pursued things a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt?
What?
Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt?
Oh, Brad Pitt.
Well, he got
but see, it's his character. I really loved Louis. So yeah.
So here's $1 million question. Have you seen the new AMC version, and what were your feelings on that? I have to say, as a huge fan of Anne Rice, I loved it. I thought it was an amazing recreation or sort of reinvention of the book, but I know a lot of people had mixed feelings about it.
So I have not read the books, and I think that it's really important that people can, when there is something new, if you can try to put aside what you've seen, so that way, because here's the thing, if you don't sit there and put aside your preconceived notions and your love for the other thing, you really could do yourself a disservice, because you're going into it with a bit of an attitude. But if you try to wipe the slate clean and really try to enjoy it as if you've never seen the movie before, as if you haven't read the books, I thought it was absolutely incredible. I loved it.
I did too. Big fan, and I can't wait for season 2.
Yeah, exactly.
For those of you who are not aware, we're talking about the AMC miniseries, or the new AMC series based on Interview with the Vampire, which does make some pretty significant both cosmetic and conceptual changes to Anne Rice's story. But in my personal opinion, and I would assume other folks share this view, absolutely captures the spirit of Anne Rice without being slavish to the novel. It makes some very interesting changes that bring in some really different social constructs and ideas. Personally, did enjoy it. So if you haven't seen it, just beware. It's pretty graphic. It can be very, very bloody, but I think it's a fascinating interpretation of Anne Rice for those of because you know that. So, and the next big thing.
Right. Is it set in modern days?
Another question for you.
Mm-hmm.
It actually starts in the 1912 thereabout as it starts. So it changed the time period and details, but I think it did so beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
For kind of to lead into another topic. So you do not only identify as a vampire, but you are a witch as well. And now, in what sense do you mean that? Because again, we've talked a great deal about witchcraft, both in folklore and in real practice here on the show. And so, do you have a particular tradition, particular sort of method? Are you a solitary? Do you belong to a coven of any kind? How do you define your witchcraft? And tell us a little bit about that.
So I am pretty much solitary in everything that I do. And with witchcraft, it was interesting because I first began, I got this book. It was this really cute little hole in the wall store that I found when I was in California. And it had, it had candles, it had music, it had incense and everything. And I found this book. I was just drawn to it. And it said Wicca across the front of it. And so through there, I learned about all these different practices and everything. And I was interested in it, but I didn't feel really called to practice it exactly as it was stating in the book. And then as time went on, I ended up acquiring more books and I learned about more paths, so I have books on voodoo. I have stuff on Appalachian folklore or magic, and I have stuff from Israel Regardie and the Golden Dawn, chaos magic, and I mean, you name it, it's on my shelf. And so for me, I kind of believe that it really all just comes down to intention. And so there are things that can help focus the mind. And so I just kind of go with the energy and where it calls me to go. So I might do a candle spell for one thing. I might use herbs for another. I just kind of go where the energy is.
So you're a full-blown eclectic. Absolutely. So that's actually the way I think probably more modern witches and neo-pagans are eclectic than really anything else. I think that there are a lot of wonderful groups that exist out there that belong to a particular tradition or create their own traditions. But I think the eclectic, solitary, or sort of at least sort of point-to-point witch is a little bit more common. We did have, if you haven't looked at any of our back catalog, a couple months back, we did do a really good 90-minute show on sort of the origin and history of witches and how it ties into modern day witchcraft, which you might enjoy.
Nice.
But no, that's wonderful. Now, do you have a particular author or tradition within Wicca that you are drawn to or that you particularly like in terms of flavor or anything like that?
No, I really don't. I'm just kind of, I just like to learn as much as I can. I definitely believe in being the eternal student, and I'm open to suggestions. And yeah.
Have you ever done any kind of work with covens who have public events or anything of that kind?
No.
I will say this much: I'm not to tell you how to conduct yourself, but I would I would highly recommend it if you ever have an opportunity to attend a circle or a Sabbath or something with a group that does do open events, because they can be amazing and again very empowering. And I think especially with your sort of vampiric aspect, being able to tap into the energy around you, I think that you'd be astounded. And it can be a little bit daunting, I think it's very hard sometimes, when we're standing in a circle of people, with a fire burning in the middle or something like that, to not suddenly be taken back to an old Hammer horror movie. But it's an amazing experience, and one that I think everybody should experience at least once. There is a lot of good reason for group work and coven work. And so even if you don't belong to a coven, being able to do that a couple of times, is it can be very, very rewarding.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of want to belong in a coven now. I don't have any guys. I don't have teeth or a coven. I feel so out of place. I know. I feel like the kid at the playground and nobody's allowing me to play.
Oh, well, you have a home in the caravan.
That's right. That's true. That's very true. Yeah. But the thing is, though, several hundred years ago, you would have both been burned at the stake, Lady Ann and you, for multiple reasons. So that's,
oh, yeah.
There is progress. There is progress, folks.
I think a lot, man. I mean, seriously, I was born with 2 toes on each foot together. So my parents did not decide to do anything about it, but I'm sure that would have been seen as a witch mark. So I'd probably be fitting an ashtray by now.
That's right. That's
right.
Oh my goodness. So another aspect of this kind of new age approach to vampirism is the idea of the environmental vampire. Have you dealt much with that kind of theory? Whenever these people that are identify as these types of vampires, that they actually draw their energies from the natural world, from thunder and lightning and from storms and from the moon itself and even from nature. They draw this kind of psychic energy from the natural world. I think that if I was going to be any kind of vampire, that's the one that I would be.
That's really interesting. I honestly, I haven't heard of that. Here again, I feel like I'm very new within this world. There's a lot of different things that I'm trying to study and wrap my head around, but it would make sense though, because my friends that really know me and know how I work with energy and how certain things affect me, they've always kind of laughed and called me a forest fairy. And it's because I have noticed that if I don't go out into the woods, if there's an extended amount of time that I am away from nature or out of the forest, that I do kind of experience a bit of a depression and stuff. And there's something, and I'll go out in the woods and it's, I'm in a skirt and I'm barefoot and I'm just hopping around and I'm very at home there, and I do feel a deep connection. But as for the title, I haven't heard of that before.
All right. I'll ask another question. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say, I haven't heard that either, but it's interesting because I think what you describe, a person who draws power from the sort of natural forces of the earth, seems more akin to witchcraft than it is to vampirism. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. I think when you break it down, the primary concept of a vampire is is a being that feeds off the life of others, and it's an interesting sort of conceit because in the long run, we all do. I mean, when you eat, we eat plants and we eat animals. These are both living creatures or living, life forms. And although theoretically we don't eat them alive, we do actually feed on these organic creatures and we take our life force from them. And so I think what's interesting about the lore of vampires, werewolves, witches, and all these other things, which are often vilified in culture, is because they in some way are seen to feed on others or feed on something, but that's what every living creature does, and it's simply in a different form. And I think that, again, what you mentioned earlier, Ron, is it's the othering of people. It's the forcing people to be other than what you are and fearing them as a result of that. And so I think that maybe one of the reasons that we vilify these creatures folklorically, and in the contemporary way, is because they're different from our experience, and different tends to be frightening.
No, that's a great point. Great point. Yeah. When we had a show on this, when we were talking about werewolves, in 1692, I believe it was in Switzerland, whenever there was a great witch hunt where they were prosecuting werewolves as well as witches, seeing them as almost one and the same, because they're working with this idea of whether the diabolical, let us put it, it's something off the beaten path. But again, Lady, and now we'll wrap this around a little bit because, of course, like I said, I don't have a coven. So can you, in this modern world, and I'm sure that you can, but can you be, there's people of traditional faiths, right? I'm sure you have Catholics and everything else out there that also can identify as Wiccan. Do you see that happening as well?
I have. I've seen that I mean, within the vampire community, there are all types of people that, they identify as different religious, spiritual paths, but they also identify as a vampire.
That's right. So, do you think that if I would get the vampire teeth, am I going to get a good pew at Holy Family on Easter Sunday, do you think, or no?
I vote no on that one.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, maybe we don't want to get too deep into the whole like blood drinking thing,
That's
because of
right.
course
That's
that
right.
is
That's right.
a holy mystery as well as a vampire mystery. But
Yes.
we're not usually afraid of controversy on this show, but that may be one that we don't want to delve into too deeply.
Absolutely. Yes, that's right. That's right. Favorite vampire movie, Lady Ann?
Oh, gosh. Well, yeah, it has to be Interview with a Vampire. I mean, there was gosh, of course, now I don't remember the name of it. There was one that I watched a couple months ago, and it was an older one. It was like from the was it 60s or 70s? And it was more of the Dracula type of a film, and I fell in love with it. I hadn't seen it before. I fell in love with it. I watched it, and of course, I have no idea what it was called.
Do you remember any of the actors in it or any of the plot? I'm a big vampire movie nut, so I'm wondering now. I'm curious to see it.
There was a man who he moved into this, old house, this mansion up on the hill, and of course it was the two women, Mina and one of them had died, and then he had the other one come up to his mansion. And there was this part where he had like this Igor guy, and he was eating these bugs, and there was an insane asylum as well that they were taking care of. It was like a different part of this house or something. Does that sound familiar?
It
No.
does,
I'll have
but
to.
it's the plot of Dracula, and so unfortunately, it's a little difficult for me to narrow it down because there are so many versions that sort of that do that storyline. So unfortunately, I still can't narrow it down, but that's definitely Dracula.
Yeah.
Well, I
Dracula,
watched
I
it
got
with someone, so I sent them a message to be like, which vampire movie did we watch? So we'll see if they message me back.
Yeah. But you know what? That's a great point that we could actually
Definitely
link to
always
this
curious.
because I'd never thought about this before, but it's interesting that in a lot of the films and of course the book itself, that you have to have this insane asylum as well too, right? Because that's a great commentary on what
Right.
people feel about whenever it comes to the vampires, right? That this is a place where people need to actually go because they're not in their right mind if people think that way.
Exactly.
The novel Dracula has a lot of prejudice built into it, unfortunately, and I think
Sure,
maybe
yeah.
that's a part of it. Is that the idea a person who was in an insane asylum was particularly susceptible to evil, the forces of evil, and so it was basically again a way to vilify a marginalized community. So Renfield becomes the conduit for Dracula's evil, but he does get redeemed by the end. So I guess there's something good to be said about that.
That's right.
I
That's
have
right.
the name.
Oh,
It was Dracula 1979 with Frank
Langella. Yeah.
Langella.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one.
no.
Of
Yeah.
course, huge for that one. Very romantic.
Yeah.
Yes, I loved that one.
Yeah.
So that would be my second one after Interview with a Vampire.
Right. Yeah, that's with who was in that? Who
There was
played
also Lawrence Oliver and
Laurence
Donald
Olivier?
Pleasance.
Yeah,
There's
Laurence
Laurence
played
Olivier.
Or Lawrence.
Yep,
Dan
got
Houghton.
Olivier,
Oh.
Donald Pleasance, Kate Nelligan. Fantastic.
Yeah, Kate Nelligan. Holy cow. This is a blast from the past. Yes. And it starts out with the wreck of the Demeter, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
What was
does
that?
indeed, yeah. It's actually interesting. It started under the shipwreck from the beginning, and I think that it's interesting because that was made by Universal, who made the original 1931 film with Bela Lugosi, and it was meant to be essentially their official remake of the Bela Lugosi film. And as a result of that, it was based less on Bram Stoker's novel and more a script for the original Dracula stage play. which the 1931 film was made on. I'm sorry, I'm a complete Dracula nerd here, but so that's why the structure of the film doesn't really follow the book very much. But they did one very strange thing, and it's happened in a few films, but it's weird because they switch the names of Lucy and Mina, and Lucy ends up becoming the sort of heroine and main character and love interest, and Mina is the one who dies, which is just weird because there's no other changes to their character. They just swapped the names, and I always thought that was an odd choice, and I don't know if it was left over for some reason from the script or what, but it's just an odd choice. But a huge fan of that film, especially my favorite scene by far in that movie is when the very first time you really get a good look at Dracula, when he climbs out of his coffin and walks to the top of the stairs, spreads that huge cape like wings, and then like flies down in the fact Renfield. That is movie making brilliance, and way before CGI. So very well done.
Yes. I still don't know what happens at the end, though. I still, at this point, having seen that film many, many times, does he fly away, or what goes on at the end of that movie?
That one last scene with the sun, like in Technicolor and everything else, and then the giant kite flying away. It's an odd choice. It's an odd choice. I guess the idea was they were maybe hoping for a sequel.
Right.
Wouldn't have had any problem if they made a sequel.
Yes.
Frank Langella was the sexiest Dracula ever, probably.
That's the other thing as well too. I don't see that. I don't know what's wrong, because I don't see him as even as sexually appealing as Bela Lugosi was in the original one. I don't know. Maybe that's just my thing. I have no idea, but I just didn't see him as like the vampire. Yeah.
I think they all have their own energy. They all bring something different. So I appreciate them all differently.
Right. We're kind of movie nerds here, but yeah, I'm still thinking about the whole Frank Langella thing. He also didn't age well, by the way.
He's and I mean, we all age. I mean, I suppose that movie was made 79, so 40 some years ago at this point, almost 50 years ago. I mean, it's about 40. And he wasn't young when he made that film. He was certainly probably 40-ish then. So I mean, so he's about 80. I would say that if he's still walking around, he's doing pretty well.
Yes. Yeah. He played in Lolita, the remake of Lolita, if you've ever seen that one. And he's not a vampire in it. No, he's not a vampire. No. See how we connect the dots?
No, that was the film he ever made. The only vampire movie he ever made.
Yeah. So who was your favorite vampire then ever to be portrayed on celluloid?
Oh my gosh. My favorite vampire ever in the movies. I hate to keep repeating myself, but it was Louis. I loved his humanity. I loved the way that he tried to process things. He had those moments where he was monstrous, and I mean, he just showed that we all have different sides to us, and there's different struggles and different things that we can overcome, and I thought it was beautiful.
Chris, I'll throw the question over to you. Favorite vampire on celluloid?
The thing with me, especially with the huge, sort of catalog of movies I have in my head, it's hard to pick an all-time favorite. I would say if I had a favorite Dracula ever, it would probably be Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee's, Dracula films. He's just such a statuesque and an imposing presence. Films aren't always great, but they always look amazing. And he made that cape work better than any Dracula I've ever seen. Favorite movie vampire in general is very. I actually may say Chris Sarandon, who plays Jerry Dandridge, the vampire in Fright Night, which is one of my all-time favorite films. And I love it because he breaks the mold. He's such a casual, sort of unexpectedly, like personable vampire, and then turns into this monstrous creature. And it's still one of the best vampire films ever made. So probably if it was all-time vampires, I would pick Jerry Dandridge from Fright Night.
No, I'm going with Gary Oldman. I know. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just saying. Yeah.
Hate to say it, but it's true.
Yeah, he wrestled with his vampirism as well. He wrestled with this whole idea. Also, we should probably mention that we can do super chats now, Christopher. We haven't mentioned that yet tonight.
That is absolutely true, folks. Yes, just so you know, if you're out there in the chat. So if you become a super chatter, you are welcome to leave a tip. We are now officially monetized as a channel, which sounds a little crude and crass to say, but it's helpful to us. It keeps us going here, buys us lunch every now and again. And so anyone who's interested in leaving a tip for us, you are 100% welcome to do that. Never required, but always welcome. And we want to thank everyone, by the way, for their support, getting us to well over 1,000 subscribers now and climbing. And as the channel continues to grow, hopefully we will get more and more folks every day. So again, all you regulars who come back every week and say hello, check in, and interact with us, we are hugely appreciative and want to thank you for being out there.
Absolutely. Just like PBS. If you're enjoying this show tonight and want to see more guests like Lady Ann, please, hit that subscribe button or whatever you do. I don't know. And Lady Ann, I also promised to do a bit of a super chat dance, which I will do if somebody does donate any money. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations, you guys.
Well, thank you.
We should have people actually submit the dance they want you to do, so you'll have to learn the steps.
That's right. Well,
hey.
We can always super chat so we can get some fangs up in this joint too.
There you go.
Well, the full moon was a few nights ago, so I don't think you have to worry too much about us. But yeah, right, definitely.
Right.
And also, we want to be clear is there's not a. We do not consider Lady Ann to be a monster, despite the title of our program this evening. Seems like so far the most personable vampire we've had on the show, which obviously you're our first guest, but even still, I think you can maintain that one.
Absolutely. So, Lady Ann, where are you going from here? Say that our studio audience wants to see you in person someplace, and I will tell you, I have actually met Lady Ann in person, and she's even more engaging in her presence than she is here, which is saying a lot. But if somebody wanted to see you, do you have anything coming up? Any book signings? Any conferences? Any lectures?
Nothing in person right now. I'm kind of doing the whole underground thing. I've got 2 books that I'm trying to write. And on top of that, KPNL is growing so much. I have more music that I'm trying to get on there. I have new shows, and then, so that is really my baby and takes up a lot of time. And then, of course, there is the Caravan Library of Lore, my podcast, which is kind of it's also becoming a little brand new, and we have some big plans for that involve you, Ron.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
There's a lot of exciting things going on out there in the world. What can you indulge us a bit and tell us what your 2 books might be about?
Yeah, actually, one of them is about my journey into vampirism and how everything that has led up to this point and all the, the emotions behind it, the experiences. The other one is kind of a follow-up maybe to my first book. It's called Paramorphosis. And basically I took the word paranormal, metamorphosis, and I put them together for the title, because what I have learned being in this community is that you can experience one thing and all of a sudden it's kind of taking on this metamorphosis into being something completely different. For instance, in the beginning, you would think, okay, so we have ghosts, right? Then I learned that, okay, are these ghosts, are they spirits from people that have passed on, or is it a time slip? It was something that I never thought of before. And then you have the subject of shadow entities. Are they, something other than a spirit, or could they be a screen memory from ETs? I mean, it's such a rabbit hole. So as I've been going through some of these things, I am trying to document them and kind of compile it all into my second book.
Wow, that's
can you
awesome.
Take
Where
a minute
can we
and tell us
find
a little bit about? Yeah, just as I was going to say, tell us a little bit about the current book, which I don't know when this came out, but obviously this one currently available through Amazon.com and probably other locales. But yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so my first book actually came out at the end of February, and it is every single paranormal spooky experience that I have had since my earliest memories. So I mean, I have things in there in regards to my first psychic inklings, and seeing the shadow entities, and experiencing I guess it was an ET. There's a photograph of it. Actually, I put it in my book, a photograph that I took. My Sasquatch encounter that one really stood between publishing the book or not, because it was such an intense experience. One that I thought that I would never have. But yeah, so Aperture in the Veil is definitely, it's deeply personal. It has everything that I've experienced in it up to this point.
Very cool. Where
Now,
did you have your Sasquatch sighting?
Ohio, which I call now the
Oh,
land
wow.
of monsters.
Yes, 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 yes.
Aw, thank you, Pepper Jackie.
I was
Now, did you
thinking,
seek out any of these experiences? Were you on the hunt at any time when you had these experiences, or did they all find you?
No, they found me. With the Sasquatch one, it was kind of funny because that one, it did start as a ghost investigation, and that was the whole idea and the intention and the energy. And through the spirit box, we were hearing a lot of stuff in regards to the land and the woods. So I thought it would be a good idea to go out into the woods and continue the ghost investigation out there, and I got way more than I expected.
could
Well,
your
ladies and gentlemen
practice?
out there,
Sorry, I was just going to ask. Do you
oh,
think your practicing of witchcraft could have had anything to do with that sighting? Do you think there was some sort of connection there?
I you know, I do believe that we experience everything that we do because it's part of our contract for coming here. I believe that we're here to learn unconditional love, and that all the experiences that we have lead us to that point. Um, that's the only thing that I could think of why a lot of these things have happened, because as I've had these experiences, I have also been able to share them. I mean, I have a voice in the community by having a podcast, by writing a book, by having the radio station, and it has really facilitated a lot of healing for others, because as we come and we tell these stories, it empowers other people who are having fear or they're second guessing themselves, and then all of a sudden we tell our stories and now they have the strength to tell theirs, and it's healing. So that's just kind of how I like to look at it.
Very well said.
Thank
it
you.
makes a lot of sense. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are just about coming up on the 9 o'clock hour right now. So before we go any farther, I just wanted to very much thank Lady Ann Selene for coming on with us tonight and sort of sharing some of her experiences. It's been fascinating. And thank you so much for also being our first guest and making it such a great experience. Folks of you
Oh, it
out
was an
there who are
honor.
interested in picking up Lady Ann's book, you can find it on Amazon.com. That is Aperture in the Veil, Born into a Preternatural World, available through Amazon.com. And if you're into her podcast or checking out any of her other work, you can find her on, KPNL Radio and caravanoflore.com. So again, want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It has been a fascinating hour. And Lady Ann, do you have anything you want to share with the audience before we close up?
No, I think that I'm good. I mean, it was an honor to be here. Thank you so much. And I guess one thing that I would just remind everybody, you're not alone. These things do exist.
The other thing we need to remind everybody is, regardless of anything Herschel Walker said, you can see here that vampires and werewolves get along.
Indeed.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, thank you again so much for coming up this evening. We will be back next week with another episode of Monday Night Monsters. Thank you again so very much for being with us tonight, and you all have a wonderful and very spooky evening.